What's going on, guys? Adam here from the Health Mastery Show, and this is episode number 25 with Brad Loomis. Brad is a coach at 3D Muscle Journey, who are a group of natural bodybuilding coaches. I've been a client of 3D Muscle Journey on and off since 2014. Brad was one of the founding fathers when they came together. I believe it was 2009, so 11 years now at this stage. Brad has coached hundreds of clients and is a pro natural bodybuilder himself. And in this episode, we get into the advice that we would give for a first-time competitor. So we don't talk about the science or the training or nutrition, which we usually talk about, or my guest and I usually talk about, but more so about the mindset of getting into your first show. So when I first competed, it wasn't all that I expected. It turned out a lot differently. I had set myself up to be in quite a bad space and mentally after I competed, and I just wasn't prepared for it. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, because my coach at the time was very, very young. It wasn't 3D Muscle Journey, and there wasn't as much information readily available back in 2013. There was no podcast really. There wasn't really much YouTube, and this is an episode that I really would have wished that I had as a younger bodybuilder. So hopefully this helps some people. And if you do know anybody who can benefit from this, you're thinking about competing for the first time, or people who have competed and didn't really have a good experience, please pass this episode on to them. And as always, please leave a rating or review if you liked it. And without further ado, let's get into this episode with Brad Loomis. So Brad, thanks for coming on.
Adam, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Enjoying the weather here in California in the United States, and I'm looking forward to a good conversation with you.
Yeah, no, it was great to catch up. I think the last time we spoke was actually, other than over email, was at the Muscle Mayhem, right, in California.
That is correct. Yeah, face to face. We got to see each other, converse, and I got to watch you compete for the pro card.
And is that show going ahead this year? Because now at time of recording it is April or May. It's almost June, which would mean the show would be next month. I don't know if it's still going to go ahead. Is it?
It's been postponed.
Okay.
As of right now, I'm pretty sure that it's supposed to happen in October.
All right.
So yeah, it's supposed to go ahead. It's kind of one of those traditions, It's been something that we can count on for over 20 years now. And I would imagine that the WNBF, the INBF would probably put a high priority on that particular show.
Because Bob and Tina, the owners, or the whatever you want to call them, presidents of the WNBF, they pretty much run that show, right?
They do, yeah, they do, and it's just tradition, Adam. It's kind of like one of those things where it would be similar to, if you canceled the Super Bowl, in football, or, you canceled the NBA Finals. That's kind of our West Coast Super Bowl for natural bodybuilding. So I would think that they're going to go through as many hoops as they possibly have to in order to make that happen this year.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the NBA Finals will get canceled this year, though, right?
Yeah, you're right there.
So yeah, that would be interesting, because then I guess WNBF Worlds would be like the following month, which would be pretty interesting.
For sure.
If all goes to plan, yeah, if all goes to plan. But Brad, so I've known you for a while, or at least I've been following you for a very long while. I think the first time I ever met you, or at least I saw you in person, I don't know if we spoke, was actually in London in 2016. And you presented for Shredded by Science. And I can't remember anything that happened in that actual seminar. It was, how many years ago? 4 years ago now. But I do remember that when you got up, you started presenting all of these spreadsheets. And I was like, that's all I remember actually from that day. It was like, Brad.
My memory of that particular event is actually pretty good, Adam. And I do remember meeting you there, too.
So for those who don't know who you are, could you give us a little bit of introduction into what you do, how you got into bodybuilding, and then a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely, Adam. So the organization / company that I work for is Team 3D Muscle Journey, and most people in natural bodybuilding, weightlifting, etc., they know about Team 3D MJ. I'm one of the, Andrea calls, Andrea, our director of operations, she calls us the head coaches. So there's three of us that do the majority of the coaching: Alberto Nunez, Jeff Alberts, and then myself. And we're a team. We've got a director of science. He calls himself chief science officer. His name's Eric Helms. Pretty well known by most. Andrea Valdez. She's our director of operations. Kind of our producer of content, I guess you might say. And we've got what we call a injury prevention management specialist. His name is Nick Licamelli. He recently joined our team, I want to say late last year. We've got Steve Taylor. He's our registered dietitian. And then we've got kind of a mental health, not really a mental health counselor, I guess you might call her, but just kind of somebody to lean on, as far as mental health goes. Her name's Amanda Rizzo. So we're a team that coaches bodybuilders, physique athletes, and power lifters, and all things, just kind of strength sports related, I guess you might say, in that particular realm.
Yeah, I've actually had before you on. I think I can't remember which number episode this is. Maybe 25. But I've had Eric. I've had Eric, Steve, Nick, Jeff. Yeah, I've had all those on. I don't think I've missed anybody.
Good.
Yeah, I haven't had Alberto or Amanda or Andrea, but the rest of the team have been on already.
Okay.
But
good,
sorry,
good.
Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, no, not a problem. So I guess since your listeners are probably familiar with them, I don't have to beat a dead horse, so to speak, and continue talking about them. But as far as me, as myself, my background is primarily in healthcare. I got a bachelor's degree in medical imaging, and I worked in medical imaging, which is basically radiography, X-ray, ultrasound, CAT scan, all of the imaging specialties, I guess you might say, and graduated in 1997. And I worked in healthcare primarily as an ultrasonographer for about 5 years before I really started getting into bodybuilding. And what really got me into bodybuilding was kind of more so at the time what I felt was a necessity. I was diagnosed with what is usually a pretty severe back disorder. It's called spondylolisthesis. And then on top of that, I was later diagnosed with scoliosis and had a very mild case of what's called spina bifida that usually most people know about from newborns when their spine, it doesn't close up. So in my mind at the time, I was like, wow, I need to do whatever I can to fight off the effects of these different spine disorders. And so that's what kind of got me into lifting weights seriously in bodybuilding, just because I knew that I had to make sure I stayed strong and supported my somewhat fragile spine. And then also I needed to lose weight. I needed to, at the time I was, fairly heavy, and I just knew that was not going to bode well, with my spine disorder. And that's what kind of got me into bodybuilding, and it just kind of evolved from there. And my desire to compete was strictly that. It was a desire. And I mean, for first timers that are out there, my biggest piece of advice to those folks would be, know what it is that you're getting into, because the physiques all look great. Everybody wants to have that, shredded six-pack abs, call it tone, call it separation, whatever you want to call it. Everybody wants that. But when I got into bodybuilding, I really studied more so the life than the competitions, if that makes sense.
So what age were you first, Brad, when you got into bodybuilding? You're in your mid-20s or so.
Actually, no. I started lifting when I was in my late 20s, but I really didn't get into bodybuilding as far as the competition goes until like early 30s.
That's
I,
that's
I
like
think,
not usual, right? So most people would think that at that point they're almost past it. At least people who aren't in the bodybuilding sport would think that at that point you're almost at your peak at least, or almost
hmm
past it. For you, it was just your beginning.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I want to say that really I didn't start getting serious about bodybuilding and just lifting weights until my late 20s, and I think my first competition was actually, it might have been when I was 29. I'd have to count the years, Adam, and that's boring. So, but it was late 20s, early 30s, you know.
Yeah.
But but yeah, I mean, I had studied bodybuilders, and just kind of followed them, like the likes of Skip LaCour, who was actually kind of my mentor slash coach for my first competition. Jeff Willett, different natural bodybuilders that were pretty big at the time. And really, Adam, I was more about living that life than I was about the actual competition. And by living that life, I mean, I was reading about Skip, kind of packing his food with him and going to, family gatherings and excusing himself for a few minutes while he went out to his car and ate his food, and getting up at 5 in the morning, to get his training done. And that appealed to me more than really the competition, I guess you might say. And
Yeah.
and hearing the guys talk about the low energy and hunger and starvation and the small rewards that come along with that, like seeing new cross striation in your vastus lateralis, and seeing the pounds go off and practicing the posing, that was my desire to get into the sport of bodybuilding, was more so a desire to live that life than it was the actual competition itself. And it just intrigued me, it fascinated me, and I've always been about the behind the scenes work, of high level athletes, and I just, I wanted to live that life.
It sounds like what you just explained there, that you're like a masochist. You just
Hey, I mean,
explained.
maybe, but at the same time, I don't know. It's something that's always intrigued me about, just the hard work. Like my favorite movies are always the movies like Rocky, where at least a good portion of the movie is him going through his training, getting ready for his fight. Um, Football movies where you see these guys going through, sometimes unhealthy, um, phases of their life to perform at a high level in their sport. I don't know why that has always just fascinated and intrigued me, but that was what really got me into the sport of bodybuilding.
Yeah, I guess it's challenging yourself mentally, and pushing yourself beyond the norm, and then understanding that at the end of that it leads to something greater, rather than just saying I'm going to punish myself for the sake of it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like in all those things that you've explained there, the Rocky movies, or the bodybuilders, like they're doing it with it for a greater purpose. They're not doing it to just punish themselves in this kind of strange, bizarre way, but really kind of testing themselves in some form of stoic mentality or capacity that leads to a greater good beyond what, instant gratification. Essentially, that's the kind of the way that I kind of see it. And I think that you do learn a lot of those principles when you actually go through a natural bodybuilding prep. And I think for me, when I started first bodybuilding, when I first got into it, it was maybe 11 years ago, or maybe 12 years ago. I'm 28, so I was 16 or so when I started liking bodybuilding. Ants Physique didn't exist, right? So nor did it's really social media. I think Facebook, maybe, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, but it was more so. I feel that I got into it because of what it meant to actually do bodybuilding. So for me, actually, I remember, and I was looking at the cover of the magazine the other day. It was I think it was 2003 or 2006. It was a Slam magazine. I used to love basketball. A Slam magazine cover with Shaq and Kobe, or
Mm-hmm.
not Shaq and Kobe, Shaq and Dwayne Wade on the front, and
Oh.
they just have these, like, they're just good genetics, like, they're genetically blessed in every single way. But they probably barely lift weights, but they were kind of muscular, well, more muscular than I was, at least at 16
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, 15. And I was like, wow, I really want to look like that. And then that kind of evolved into, I remember buying a Flex magazine or muscular development. It was Dexter Jackson, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
it looked like he was wearing a Roman armor. Like his delts were just massive, you know, like
Yeah.
bigger than my head or bigger than I could ever, fathom that my delts would ever be. But it just had this kind of, uh, it almost stood for something else, like greater than the actual physical look. So for me, it was like, wow, that what he represents in terms of just, I felt like some sort of masculine energy, or just this level of, you could physically see the work, with other things like CEOs or people who've done very well in other sports like team sports. You can't really see their hard work unless you actually see
Mm-hmm.
them play out. But with bodybuilders, and I think that's why I had a lot of respect for them, you could physically see somebody wearing the hard work that they put in over the years. And I remember when I was 18, the first time I ever met, I went to my first bodybuilding show, and the guest poster was Ronnie Coleman. He was just finishing his career. I think he's retired maybe 1 or 2 years, and he was massive. I'd never seen somebody so big, and
Mm-hmm.
just the it was like, being starstruck. And I'm not really someone who gets starstruck, but like that, and that's kind of how I got into it. I guess it kind of leads us into the topic today in a roundabout way of the advice that you would give for people who are considering bodybuilding for the first time, and perhaps how that's changed over the years, in terms of now these new physiques or new categories have emerged, like men's physique, or even fitness competitions, like other organizations, like the WBFF is one that I can think of, but other
Mm-hmm.
ones where it's like kind of model-esque, and the rise of, say, social media as well can often perhaps lead people to think that they want to compete more so for what that will bring them, rather than necessarily what you actually gain or learn about yourself as you go through this process. So if someone was saying to you today, Brad, look, I want to compete in bodybuilding, and for you, you're probably a little bit older and had a wiser head on your shoulders when you start getting into bodybuilding at 30 years old. Most people probably get into it in their mid-20s, perhaps even younger. What kind of advice would you give, or what things would people have to consider first, that perhaps on paper, wouldn't really think about? They just think, okay, I got to lose some fat, and then I got to put some tan on. What would you start with that?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would do, Adam, to be honest with you, is have them, re-listen to the intro that we just did. Have a desire to go through what it is that you're going to have to go through. Because I don't know, I've seen so many people fail to follow through with their plans when they have even like a strong attachment for what it is that they want, you know. So that's the first thing is know why you want to do it, and know what you're getting into, and want to do that. Like I said, when I first got into bodybuilding, I wanted to live that lifestyle. I could really care less, at the time about the end product. I mean, I shouldn't say care less, but that was not my attachment. I ended up getting it, right? But I only got that because of the 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 love for the process, and of course that led to, like, I almost want to say robotic execution of the plan, because at some point you have to have that. You have to have that robotic execution, right? And so that's the first thing I would say is know what you're getting into, and fall in love with that process. And then after that, you know, kind of do your homework of who to listen to, and who not to. And more importantly than even that is to make sure that you really trust who it is that you're listening to. So, like, especially for first time competitors, I highly recommend having a coach. Um, and do, like I just said, do your due diligence, do your research, know who it is that you're reaching out to, um, and you know, I almost want to say that the attachment to that person should almost be stronger than their credentials. You know what I mean? Because most people, um, they're gonna follow their mentor, their coach, better if they have that kind of connection to them. You know what I mean? Um, but yeah, I think first timers, I highly recommend a coach because it's such a the peace of mind that comes along with it, and not second guessing yourself and not redoing your plan over and over and over again. I think is very it's worth the money, you know, as far as what you're going to have to fork out. Um, and then
Yeah,
after, go ahead.
I think on the coaching bit, I remember when I first thought about competing. I think it was I'd always wanted to compete, say when I was in my teens, but not as a teenager. But never felt I had the size. So like I said, men's physique wasn't around. Actually, in Ireland, all they had was untested bodybuilding. So these guys were, in the 30s and 100 kilograms, 220 pounds on stage ripped. So I mean, as a teenager, naturally you're not. I didn't even feel like I had a place there. So
Mm-hmm.
I think I wanted to wait until I was. I think they had released some sort of men's physique or fitness that started to come out when I was in my early 20s, and I don't think I even knew of 3DMJ in around 2012. I know you guys were up and running, but maybe you just weren't as out there on the internet all the way
Mm-hmm.
over to Ireland just yet. But I was following Lane Norton, and I was working in a supermarket or whatever at the time in college, part time. I couldn't afford Lane Norton, so I think I actually hired one of Lane Norton's clients. So he was also a pro bodybuilder. His name, I don't think he competes anymore. Actually, he doesn't. His name is Connor Lavelli.
Mm-hmm.
He was I think he was only a couple of years older than I, so he would have been like in his early 20s, and like that, I had a great bond. We did kind of like an off season together. Nothing amazing, but what I wasn't prepared for, and I guess perhaps he had some authority bias that I kind of had just thought that because he was a pro bodybuilder and had done very well at a young age, that's who I wanted to be coached with. But what I wasn't prepared for was the actual mental side of the bodybuilding preps,
Mm-hmm.
and more so what actually comes after that. So yes, it was really difficult for me that first prep. I think I lost maybe 40 pounds of body fat, and it was
Wow.
probably more than I probably should have lost. I mean, so I probably should have got a bit leaner first. But what I wasn't prepared for was, I thought at the end of this prep that I would be so much happier. I thought that I can't wait until I compete because then I'm going to get all this love from people, or I'm going to get all this social proof and admiration from people, and I'm going to feel so great about myself. But I didn't realize the psychological and physiological effects that getting so lean has on your body
Mm-hmm.
and your mental state. And I actually went to the doctor. So my show was like November, and I think by January I went to the doctor because I was like suffering from depression, or at
Mm-hmm.
least some bouts of depression, and I'd
Mm-hmm.
never suffered from anything like that in my life. I had no idea what was wrong with me, and I mean I was 21, and the doctor had like taken some testosterone, you know, she
Mm-hmm.
took some blood samples to check my testosterone, and I think they wanted to do a follow up and put me on some like you know, TRT essentially, but they didn't
Mm-hmm.
obviously understand bodybuilding and what happens. I mean, a couple of months later, it was perfectly fine, but I wasn't prepared for that at all, and I was like felt so blue, or if that's the term that I want to use.
Mm-hmm.
I'd never experienced a Christmas that I have a distinct memory, and this is like over 7 years ago. A distinct memory of that's the first Christmas I actually didn't feel like jolly as you should at Christmas time, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I just wasn't prepared for the effect this bodybuilding prep will actually have on me. And even though this last season, 2019, I competed pretty much the same time. November was my last show. Christmas was fine, because not because I was dieted differently or didn't get any leaner. I actually got way leaner this year. Same body weight as I was 7 years ago, but I was just more prepared for that. And I think that's one thing that a lot of people aren't ready for, is that, if you actually truly want to get to contest shape, it's going to be difficult not just to get there, but also afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is an excellent point, Adam. And that's something that we at 3D Muscle Journey have put a lot of emphasis on over the last probably 4 years, is the recovery portion, of a bodybuilding prep, and hence why we tend to term it more so recovery diet. than reverse diet. Because you're absolutely right. And that's something that I try to make sure that I kind of give a little bit of insight to, as we're going through the prep, you know, because as you felt, I mean, that's a pretty lonely state. And having a coach will and should kind of help you through that, or at least give you some sort of, like sometimes clients, they can't necessarily continue coaching after their competition, and I try to make it a priority to give them some sort of a game plan, some structure after their competition, so that, I don't know, you kind of learned it the second time around that, it was starkly different than your first time around. But I think the best that we can hope for is to at least minimize that almost hopeless feeling that you had, and more so prepare the person that is going through that prep for that type of an outcome afterward. But that's an excellent point. That's an excellent point, and something that I really truly feel like all coaches should help, their clients through.
Yeah, and I think for me, like when I first competed, so I've done 3 seasons so far, and it's got better each time, and 3 year gap in between each. But I think the first time I competed, I was 21 or 20, and I was in college, and you want to impress women, so you think that what they want to see is abs, and to an extent they do, but not to the point where you basically are this person who doesn't want to talk to anybody and just sit by yourself and just eat your lunch. And I expect I did love bodybuilding, but also because I was young and immature and just, social pressure, I did feel like, when I get better, I'm going to look better. I'm going to be more aesthetically pleasing to the other sex. And that's going to get me more notice from other, from females and even from other males, right? So who young guys, they want notice from anybody. And when I realized that, getting into that shape, it didn't you get some likes on Facebook if you put up a picture or something like that, or whatever I did. Some people say, oh, you look great. But then, I wasn't prepared for it, what happens after, and gaining, body fat back really rapidly, or at least, a lot more rapidly than it came off. And then being in that state where you expected, to be happy, and you expected to get all these things once you got to the end goal, once you stepped on stage, then you would get all this joy and happiness and everything. And then you start to see all this body fat come back on, and you're feeling really low about yourself. And like you said, it's very, very lonely. It's almost like a really, really bad state to be in if you do it for the wrong reasons and you're not prepared for what would actually come afterwards. So I think with the rise in say Instagram or social media, where body images are really put on this pedestal, and people who choose to follow Instagram influencers or people with great physiques, they'll often think that that's the normal, and that's what gets you higher up the social hierarchy, and that's what I have to kind of achieve. So they'll think that I should compete because I'm going to get more YouTube subscribers, or I'm going to get more money, or I'm going to get more fame, or people are going to like me more. But yet they're not prepared for what actually, number one, what actually is the reality of competing, that none of this stuff really, really happens. But also then the mental toughness or loneliness that can happen, and most likely will happen if you're not prepared for it afterwards. So I think that's why, especially when I started working with Jeff, I think I started in 2014, he really emphasized the process, and then making sure the whole time that, I'm really enjoying the process, and that, make sure that you kind of enjoy the process and not just try and beat yourself into the ground to get to this end date, because ultimately you're not going to feel that much different, but by placing a certain way at a show. But you make sure that you enjoy the whole process. And I think that's why it's important, or for me, this is just my opinion, but people who are coaches have actually competed themselves in the past. You can be a PhD in physiology and get know how to get somebody absolutely shredded, but if you don't know what they're experiencing mentally, then it's very hard for you to have empathy, or for to be compassionate for what they're actually suffering through, essentially.
Yeah, yeah, that's I think you just basically summed up my first piece of advice to somebody that wants to get on the bodybuilding stage is enjoy the process.
Mm. And then I guess another, you're a pro bodybuilder, Brad, right? So you haven't competed in a couple of years, but you have some great photos, and I don't know if I've ever seen a show where you competed at, like, I mean, watched it live. I did see photos from, I think, some of the bodybuilding.com blogs, and I remember
Hmm.
Eric and Alberto used to talk about you on the logs. I used to follow them religiously, and Paul Revelia as well. But what's your kind of thoughts, or what advice do you give somebody who wants to place well? So, bodybuilding is different than other sports where you can't just impose your will on somebody. You can't be
Hmm.
like Michael Jordan in The Last Dance and just go shoot 800 shots before everybody else. You can't
Hmm.
lift more weights. It's not going to help you. Like, so much of this is based on just time. A lot of it's based on just genetics, hard work, and consistency. Obviously, extremely important as well. But if somebody wants to go out and say, I want to win, or I want to get a pro card, or what's your kind of advice for people with that kind of mindset?
Yeah, and that's I want to say that that was something that I didn't learn early on, just because I was pretty gifted in the conditioning department, right? Most of my competitions, I, I did well or I won in, right? And so, in my mind at the time, it was I didn't even know about that particular aspect of it. I mean, I knew about it, but it just it hadn't hit me. You know what I mean? That you're not in control of your placing. Because in my mind at the time, it's like, well, just diet hard, get as lean as you possibly can, and you're probably going to win. And back then, it had a certain amount of truth to it, because just nobody could get as lean as me, and so um, contrast that with today. It's not really about just getting as lean as you possibly can, because pretty much everybody is showing up that lean, right? So I kind of had to learn this more so, Adam, as I was coaching people, than having gone through it myself. Um, and I learned it eventually, kind of firsthand once I got into the pros, right? And now you're no longer, that big fish in a little pond. You're in that much larger pool of genetic freaks. Um, but yeah, through coaching people, I kind of figured out, wait a minute here. Um, this is not it's not a realistic expectation to just go to a show and expect to win, right? Because like you said, you're not in control of your placing. Your placing is in the hands of, anywhere between 3 and 9 people, um, that are going to hold an opinion of how you look in comparison to, your competitors. So it ultimately is more of a beauty pageant than it is a sport. You know what I mean? And so as I was coaching people, I came to this realization that some of these competitors are literally shattered when they don't end up, their placing does not reflect the hard work that they put in, right? They ended up second, or they ended up fourth, or whatever. These people are working tremendously hard, and their placing is not what they expected, nor is it what they feel is a representation of the hard work that they put in. And so yeah, I quickly started realizing, what, we have to shift this mindset of I'm going to win. I'm going to, I want to show up there and dominate, and I want to get my pro card. And was quickly shifted more so to be the best version of yourself that you possibly can be, and then get up on stage and enjoy yourself. Enjoy the posing, enjoy the music, enjoy all the competitors that are around you. But like you said, Adam, you can have a PhD in bodybuilding and know how to get people shredded, but until you experience that, you can have empathy, but you don't necessarily have sympathy for the people that are, that you're coaching. And that was the same thing with me. I realized that you can't, you're not in control of your placing. You can't focus on winning, in this subjective sport until I had actually felt it. And so when I showed up to my first pro bodybuilding show, it was, Adam, it was very, very eye-opening because I was used to always placing, or I was always used to winning my class. And now here I am in this pro division. My first show, I placed second to last with arguably at the time, which was my best physique, and realized very quickly the sympathy that needs to go along with not having that big attachment to that placing, right? And I experienced that a few different times competing as a pro. And that's what kind of led me to very much my coaching philosophy now, which kind of reinforces what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast here, is that you need to fall in love with the process of getting to where it is that you're going to be. You're going to end up executing the plan better. You're going to get in better shape, actually, than if you just kind of drudge your way through it. And then, before you even get on the bodybuilding stage, you're already a winner. And then you just have to leave the placing up to those there in front of you to, put the people in order that their opinion is what, it needs to be in order to have the placing for the competition.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult one for me to kind of lay out in terms of in my mind, because it's competitive bodybuilding, and I come from a competitive background, and that's kind of why I got into bodybuilding, because I live in Ireland, so basketball obviously not very big in Ireland, but on a relative scale I did quite well. At a younger age, all the way up until my early 20s, I was playing highest level competitive basketball, and I remember the feeling of going out and knowing that our team was like the best in the country pretty much, and that some of these games would be neck on neck, but I had this feeling of excitement before, like almost like a Christmas Eve as a kid, and that you can go out and give it everything, and you can impose your will essentially onto the other team, and you get this amazing feeling when you win. And I remember we when I was 18, I think I lost a game that was a final for the national final, and we should have won, but we just got complacent, and how bad I felt because I lost, and just felt really low, didn't want to talk to anybody. Like, I think I might have probably been in tears even. And I know your son plays American football, right? So it's very similar, neck on neck, like a boxing match. It's someone definite win, definite loss, and you can come back stronger and better. But bodybuilding, you get similar feeling before you get on stage, at least I do, but you can't have that kind of same expectations where, when people say, you often hear this cliche thing, well, if losing doesn't hurt, well then you won't taste the sweetness of winning or something like that. But you can't have that, because you could do every single thing. You could cross all the X's or cross the T's and dot the I's. You could unturn every single stone and be absolutely perfect for your whole life. But somebody could just rock up and have better genetics than you and just beat you every single time. And 10 other people could beat you every single time. Yeah. And, if you had that mindset, you're pretty much setting yourself up for a life of misery and feeling like you're an absolute failure. So it's definitely hard to balance, because at the same time, it's not like everybody come out and just everybody comes first, because it's a participation show. It's bodybuilding, competitive bodybuilding.
Yeah. I did. You kind of put you definitely dotted the I there, Adam,
So how do you balance that?
You go ahead.
How would you balance? So how do you personally balance that and teach people to balance that? For me, initially it was a hard shift to try and maybe realize that, if I don't place that well, like for example, last July when I went to compete, I was, one of the things that I was looking forward to the most was actually just competing against Eric, for example, in the same class. And that was like the win for me almost, because I didn't want to, of course you want to win, but at the same time you want to balance it so you don't feel like, oh, well, this is I don't want this to upset the rest of my time in California because I didn't win, in the same way that, and that's the kind of mindset I would have when I was playing basketball or team sports. And you almost need that kind of gunning mentality where, you'll win at all costs. Kind of like we said, Michael Jordan, he had that win at all cost mentality, anything to win. But if, put Michael Jordan in bodybuilding, if he didn't have the genetics to win, he's going to get beaten by the guy who's got better genetics every single time.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what's important is just the reality of that. Just, like the when I was a kid, there was a toy that we used to play with that was called G.I. Joe, and they had a cartoon that went along with it that you could watch. And at the end of every G.I. Joe, cartoon, they always said, knowing is half the battle. And that's what you have to know. You have to know that, what, there, the likelihood that you're not going to get the placing that you're after is pretty good. It's at least, more than a 50-50, right? And so you have to know that. But at the same time, the way that I looked at it, especially for my first competition, which I didn't really, at the time I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. You can use that to drive that kind of competitive desire to drive to push yourself harder because, okay, yeah, there's no guarantee that I'm going to win. There's no guarantee that, Jeff Alberts is going to show up to my show and absolutely kick my butt, right? But at the same time, you can use that unknown to drive yourself harder to be better, right? I have to be, as lean as I can possibly be. I have to, nail all of my training sessions to hold on to every gram of muscle that I possibly can in order to have the muscle that I need on the bodybuilding stage. I need to practice my posing so that when I'm up there, I just look like a pro. I look like I've done this 100 times and I know exactly what it is that I'm doing, and I'm smiling, and nobody else could possibly have put more work into their posing than I did, right? You have to do everything that you have to do as if you're going to win, as if you're expecting Jeff Alberts to show up, but at the same time, know the realization is that there's no guarantee that you're going to win. There's no guarantee. There's really no even guarantee that you're going to have a fair placing. You know what I mean? Because it is such a subjective sport. But at the same time, you can kind of use that unknown to drive yourself harder, to work harder, to be more perfect about dotting your I's and crossing your T's so that you can be the absolute best version of yourself. And then, of course, if you get your placing, that's kind of the icing on top of the cake, or, the cherry on top. But if you don't, you still know that you did everything in your power, and you can live peacefully with knowing, well, on this particular day, the 7 opinions of the competition didn't think that I was the best.
Yeah, now, it makes a lot of sense. I think it comes with experience and also just maturity as someone ages, as well. So when someone first begins, or someone's doing their first prep, would you set that up differently or try to get a different outcome than someone who's, say, more experienced in terms of the number of seasons they've done? So I know, you want to be the biggest and most shredded on stage, but given all the things that we talked about and some of the things that people don't think about that comes as a side effect of getting so lean, would you push or would you advise competitors to push that far, knowing that they haven't actually done something that's so mentally difficult? It's almost like saying, well, you've never done an ultramarathon before, you've got the fitness level, so go ahead and do it, but you don't really understand the mental turmoil that comes along with it. So would you set it up the same way or try to get the same outcome for a new competitor versus a seasoned competitor?
Yeah, that's a great question. And just like a lot of our answers for a lot of different questions, it really depends, right? It depends on the person. And that's why, Adam, I really like to meet with my clients, my athletes, right off the bat. Once they've made up their mind, they're gonna do a competition. They're gonna go with us as coaches, and we get all of that kind of preliminary stuff out of the way. I want to meet with that person, just like you and I are here. All the outlets that are out there. There's tons of ways to make that very easy, and just to kind of get a feel for that person. Where is their mindset? Because sometimes the writing and the application that they put in there is misleading. You know what I mean? Sometimes they tell us what they think that we want to hear, and when you actually meet with that person, you kind of find out more about how it is that they tick. And so, how does it vary from person to person? Sometimes it's just a matter of kind of judging a book by its cover. Some people, they come to you and they have this goal of winning their pro card or whatever, and we can kind of tell the physique is not at that level for what the goal is that they want, and so you have to kind of break it to them kind of gingerly. You know what I mean? And if they still have that desire to compete, yeah, we're gonna get them in as good a shape as we possibly can, but we have to just kind of all through the coaching, going back and forth, like you kind of know about every single week, kind of preparing that person. This is the way we're going to go, and we're probably not going to be able to push you to that conditioning level, that it is that you're after. We're going to have to kind of know that this is your first competition. We're just going to kind of settle for what it is that we know you can mentally and physically do, and just know that we're going to get up there as the all-time best that you've ever been, but we may not be where it is that you want to be yet. Doesn't mean we're not going to get there, but sometimes the goals that are out there, they take decades of work to get to, and we're not going to get that in the very first 6, 8, 10 month prep, right? And so yeah, there's those kind of folks. There's the folks that are genetically gifted. They kind of like, I used to tell some people, well, shoot, they walked into the gym with abs. So those are the kind of people that we kind of figure out, okay, well, you know what, you've got the physique, you've got the genetics, you've put in the 5, 10, 15 years of work already. We can
but they're only 20 years old.
Exactly. Yeah. And we can say, okay, we can push for that, but does that mentally mean that they can do that? Kind of like you found out, you're probably your first time you met somebody that was just genetically, better than you. You can push as hard as you possibly can and still lose. There's those people that are almost guaranteed to win, but they can't push themselves to get to that level. You know what I mean? Because sometimes people they've got the genetics, but they don't have the mentality, and not even necessarily the work ethic, Adam. It's just the suffering that they have to go to in order to get to that level. And those are all things that it all depends. And we all kind of find that out as we're walking that path together, doing that prep, that we have to kind of evaluate and sometimes alter the course a little bit.
Yeah, I think when people ask me kind of how it feels to be digging or to be towards the end of a prep, and I kind of explain that, when I explain to them would be like, have you ever gone shopping at Christmas time where you're getting all the Christmas presents and you're carrying around a lot of presents or just items all day, and you're walking like 20,000 steps, and you get home and you just want to like plop on the couch? I was like, yeah, you feel like that when you wake up in the morning. That's yeah. And then you got to train and get in your steps as well. But I think, like you said, regardless of the muscle bellies or the musculature that people have, so often they won't feel like when they're feeling like that, it's not worth it anymore. Or I don't have this greater motive to keep digging. I'm just doing this to get on stage because I've got good looking muscles, and someone told me that I should do this. It's not worth it for me. And like you said, for my very first prep, I probably did push through mentally, but it probably wasn't the right thing to do. I probably should have stopped short, or at least the coach I was recommending at the time probably should have saw that in me, that I shouldn't have been pushed that far, because at that stage I almost got burnt out, because I was like, whoa, this bodybuilding thing. Even my mother at the time was like telling me afterwards, like, yeah, don't do that again, because because it's almost like well, that's the normal, that's what happens when you bodybuilding. It's like, this is not worth it at all, But yeah, but Brad, it's been great to chat to you. I know we didn't talk about like the nuances of setting up a diet or anything like that, or cardio, because I suppose I've kind of talked about those multiple times with other people, and it's been really good to chat to you about some of these things that people don't think about when they're actually prepping. Actually, in fact, most people don't. They just ask about, what macros should I have, or what training or cardio, without thinking about what actually goes into this, how difficult this can actually get, but how much reward it can actually be. And especially the thing about placing as well. I know that I've seen multiple mainly younger bodybuilders posting, oh, I came second. This isn't the position that I trained for, or whatever. And it kind of breaks my heart a little bit, for a few minutes anyway, that they feel like they've wasted all their time, or they feel like it's not been worth all this because they didn't get the placing. Because I've been there where I've actually done really well, and I've been there where I've come last, and to be honest, it doesn't really make that much difference the day after or the week after. It's all the same. But Brad, it's been great to chat to you. So where can people find more about your work?
Well, obviously, 3dmusclejourney.com, www.3dmusclejourney.com. That's kind of our hub, as far as everything that we produce, whether it's podcasts, it's blogs, it's, our free courses, our paid courses. Always everything is kind of centralized there. A lot of our products that we produce, as far as the information, both free and paid, is at 3dmjvault.com. So vault like bank vault, VAULT, 3dmjvault.com. That we have a ton of content there. And really, to be honest with you, I kind of like to direct people more there than anywhere, you know what I mean? Because that's the culmination of a whole team, and their information, that they put out there. But as far as myself, in my little world, I'm on social media, just like most people, and most of the time it's 3DMJ Coach, just like 3D Muscle Journey, and then Coach, COACH, and that's pretty much my username, whether it be Instagram, whether it be Twitter, whether it be what have you. That's where you're going to kind of find me, as 3DMJ Coach, if you are indeed wanting to know more about Brad Loomis.
It's been great to chat to you, Brad, and take care on the front line, and thanks for all the work that you're doing, and all the information that you're publishing in the natural bodybuilding scene, and hopefully chat to you soon again.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Adam. I greatly appreciate it. I'm honored.
So I hope you enjoyed this episode with Brad Loomis. If you want to find more out about Brad and his work, you can find all the links in the show notes. And if you want to find out more about myself and my coaching services as well, you can go onto my website. It's all in the show notes, and you can find out more about that there. I hope you enjoyed this. I really, really did enjoy talking to Brad here. I know I say that every time I talk to somebody, but at the end of the day, it's my podcast, and I invite people on who I think I'll enjoy talking to. But I really think this is one of the most valuable podcasts for people who want to get into bodybuilding and want to start. It's something that I wish I would have had before I began, and I want to put this out there for people who are starting to think about doing a show, or have done one or two shows but didn't really get what they expected, or it was a lot tougher than what they expected mentally. So if you know anybody that you think would benefit from this, please do share this podcast with them. My goal is to kind of spread the word of natural bodybuilding, and in the word of the natural bodybuilders, I will